Hey everybody, Ty here. I hope you all are doing well. Hopefully, you're looking forward to the upcoming change of the weather over these next couple weeks. It's going to be really nice out. But that also is the perfect segue for this video because we do have the new monthly temperature outlook out. This came out a little earlier today. I've been kind of sidetracked. Otherwise, would have had this video up a little bit sooner, but I think we'll still end up being on schedule. Making the thumbnails for these can be pretty hard too because it's a lot of ground to cover. But anyway, though, one thing that we'll have to keep in mind with this outlook is these next 6 to 10 days, and I'm sure a lot of you are excited about it, is the 6 to 10 day outlook. This does start to bleed into September, so this is ultimately going to affect how the outcome looks. So by the time we get to the end of the month and we have the final outlook, it could look a little bit different. We're going to have to wait and see how things pan out, though. But in either case, let's go ahead and get into things here. And we'll start with the temperatures, of course. Now, obviously, as we mentioned before, the point of contention is really going to be mainly over towards the Midwest and the deep South here. That big cool down is going to affect the overall average temperature that we're going to see over towards these areas. But we are, of course, expected to warm back up over time. This isn't going to be a long-lasting pattern where we see temperatures as much as maybe 10 to 15 degrees below average. It's going to be for mainly just a brief period, but it's still going to be rather significant for the time of year, hence why it's making headlines. But once we kind of level back out here, you can see that we still just about across the entire lower 48 have a very small chance of being above average here. There are some hot spots, figuratively and literally, that we will be watching. Over towards the Four Corner States is going to be one of them, where we have the highest probability of above average temperatures. Another classic tell of a positive PNA where it's warmer out towards the west, cooler out towards the east. The Northeast, this has not been anything new. We're expecting you guys to be above average here. But considering during this time of year where the temperatures really start to fall off from this point, it's not so surprising to see this, but the confidence in which we have these above average temperature percentages is really something to make note of. So there are going to be a few hot days over here in particular. Usually during this time of year, especially when we look at teleconnections, oscillations, etc., sometimes this area will start to feel the impacts first before the rest of the country does, depending on which oscillation comes into effect here. I think the AO and the NAO are going to be a big factor as to why that is. Over towards Florida, you guys are usually the last place to get any sort of impacts when it comes to temperature change, especially with you guys, especially over towards the peninsula. This isn't anything new, so for the most part, expect it to be above average for most of the month, if not the entire month. Unfortunately, you guys might miss out on the cold front, but if you guys are used to this, it's not going to really be all that much of a big deal. Another place we're, of course, watching at all times is Alaska. And for the most part, I would say that the temperature map looks about like what you would expect. Towards the eastern half of the state, we're kind of leveling off at an equal chance. So we'll be seeing some shifting occur. I think the Arctic oscillation is going to be playing a big part in that, but it doesn't really translate all the way down to the southern half of the state. So northwest, for the most part, you're going to pretty much stay stable here, and you have a little bit higher than above average chances for some above average temperatures. So the main takeaways from this is anywhere that's east of the Rockies, especially anywhere east of the Mississippi River, it's kind of wide open right now. It's still lean above average, but just barely. But the areas that we're most likely to see above average temperatures are going to be mainly out towards the west and, of course, towards the Florida Peninsula and the Northeast at this point. So let's shift our attention now. And I think this precip map, there's going to be a few changes with this as well, considering the way the jet stream is probably going to be looking as we get towards the middle part of the month. Because after this cold blast goes through, the storm track itself is going to kind of zone out, become a little bit more zonal, or zone out, as I was trying to say. But what I mean by zoning out is usually whenever you get those bigger storm systems, you have a little bit more in the way of troughing. I mean, we can still see that, but you're not going to see as much in the way of troughing as we transition seasons to begin with. So the chances for shower and storm activity is going to remain a little bit lower towards the central part of the country. Not to say that they can't happen, but the odds are going to be a little bit lower. A little further to the west of the Rockies, I would say that I would expect below average precipitation to be expected over here. It's not uncommon for this time of year, especially with the neutral enzo, but just some extra things that we're going to be looking out for. Towards the deep south, Gulf moisture is still going to be in play, especially after the frontal boundary passes. And then, of course, there's always the tropics that we're going to be watching, along with a little bit of the MJO, which we'll talk about a little bit later. That's really going to be the key factor in keeping the precipitation chances up over towards this region, hence why we have the above average precip here. Keep in mind that this is prone to changing, and this is somewhat dependent on tropical activity. Keep in mind that it is peak hurricane season here, so as a result, we're going to be watching this area a little bit closer towards the East Coast, of course, the Gulf Coast. And then the last area that we're going to talk about, of course, is the Northwest and Alaska over here. For the most part, the state of Alaska itself is going to have an equal chance of above or below average precip here. But if you look towards the southeastern part of the state, this is where things kind of get a little bit interesting, and you can kind of see a little bit of a connection here from the southeastern part of the state into the Northwest. We are kind of leaning into a point where we are shifting like on the edge of maybe a weak La Nina for winter. So that transition is going to start to happen during the early to middle part of the fall season. What's going to be interesting for this month is seeing how that kind of plays into the ultimate forecast here for this region particularly, because you normally, as we start to lean into what will be a La Nina winter, the Northwest usually tends to get a lot of the moisture first. So I'm really intrigued to see how this ultimately plays out here. So now that we talked about that, let's go ahead and take a look at the two oscillations that I'm always the most interested in when it comes to especially the change of season and also just cold blast in general. And for those of you that are more familiar, you know what these two are: Arctic oscillation towards the North Pole and the North Atlantic oscillation over towards Greenland and Iceland. So we're kind of in the middle of a transition here. Both of these have kind of gone back to positive, or this has kind of gone back to positive phase. This is a pretty strong negative phase that comes in here, and this is allowing some of that cooler air to come in. I'd actually even go as far as to say that we're kind of in a little bit of a neutral phase with that frontal boundary passing through. This allows some of that cold air to come in, and look at how significant that is. You normally don't see this during this time of year just yet. You usually have to wait about maybe a month longer, maybe even sometimes all the way up into November before you start seeing notable cold air masses like this. Not saying that it can't happen, but this looks almost textbook. Again, classic positive PNA setup where we're seeing all the warm air out towards the west and the cold air out to the east. It's a textbook look, if I were to say so myself. But notice if I go into the next week here, this doesn't last long. We still end up being in a negative AO phase and kind of sitting in between, maybe in a neutral phase for the AO region. There's a little bit of cold air existent there, and there's also a little bit of warm air off to the south. So kind of sandwich, so to speak. Keep in mind that we're looking at this from week to week, so this doesn't really tell the story of what every day is going to be like. But fact of the matter is, though, by the time we get towards the middle part of the month here, we're going to be back into a pretty well-established positive AO, positive NAO phase, and kind of back and forth here with the AO, which is usually our wake-up call that the season is changing. We might have another sneaky little cold shot that could come in later into the month, depending on how well that air mass holds up. It may just get stuck in Canada for all we know at this point. But the fact that we're still seeing a consistent look of a negative AO or neutral AO, is, if I was to go as far as to say, says a lot about how unpredictable the month itself could be. If we were to end up getting any point where we would get a negative NAO to coincide along with that, I think that really changes things for the eastern and the midwestern states as well, particularly the northern states. The southern states, it's still kind of up in the air right now. And keep in mind, any sort of tropical interaction changes this as well. So very liquid type of forecast. So this is going to, of course, be needing fine tuning as we go forward. And then just we're consistently seeing a very similar signal. It looks like by this point we're finally starting to maybe shift into a positive AO because that cold air mass is finally starting to move out. And then this looks like this sets up shop just in time for October here. And it looks like that we might be shifting into a negative P&A where the cold air is going to start to maybe go into the western states to start the month. So maybe a little bit of a stark comparison as we transition further into fall. So now we've talked about that. We'll also see how this coincides with our jet stream here. Again, this is all week to week. There's no way for me to really look at this day to day as of yet. So this is very much prone to changing. We'll be able to get better details by the time we get into the very end of this month, like literally the last day. But looking at what I'm seeing right now, here's that cold blast that we were talking about. This is going to make that fall-like weather reality over here towards the eastern states and, of course, over towards Ohio Valley and Midwest. Notice, though, but as we go further along, we see a little bit of a ridge trying to build up here over towards the western states. But out towards the east, you don't really see much in the way of troughing. No sharp dip here in the jet stream. This is going to make the weather a little bit more zonal, a little bit more dry, which is going to lower thunderstorm chances, as you can hear the thunder outside right now, outside my window. But you can kind of see this pattern kind of hold its consistency as we go throughout these next few weeks here. We start to see a little bit of change maybe beginning to occur towards the end of the month. The more significant change, I think, at this point, just based off what I'm seeing in the models, might be towards the end of the month and of course, the beginning of October. Now, how this ultimately will affect our temperatures, obviously, we're going to have the biggest swing here as we get towards the very end of this month heading into next. You can see that on the map here, we have areas where we see maybe 15 to even 20 degrees below average here in the blue. And in stark comparison, if you were to go ahead and take a look at the western states, you're seeing as much as maybe 20, maybe even 30 degrees above average here as well. So pretty significant numbers here. By the time we go forward here into week 2, you can see that cold air, it still lingers. And we could see maybe about another 10 degrees below average here. But by the time we get into the early to middle part of the month here, we're kind of leveling back off here. Not seeing too much in the way of extremes here unless you get towards the northern states where we're about 10 to 15 above average there, towards the Dakotas, Montana, etc. And then over towards Maine as well. Looks like things kind of level off again as we get towards the middle of the month, and then as we get towards the latter half of the month, start to see a little bit of cold air trying to sneak its way back in towards the Ohio Valley here as well. Again, like I said, it's week to week, so can't really put a whole lot of merit into it, but something that I'm going to be keeping an eye on because at this point we're looking more so for trends than a final forecast. So another thing to watch for, of course, is moisture. Now watch how things kind of slow down as we get towards the middle part of the month. Obviously, with the way things are set up right now, plenty of moisture to go around towards the deep south. There's a good bit of moisture over here towards the central and western plains here as well. Now watch as we move to the following week. We still have that little belt of moisture that hangs out over towards the Ohio and Tennessee valleys and the southern plains. But as we go further along, you can start to see things begin to dry out. This is during that time where we start to see the jet stream kind of become more zonal. And as a result, the rain chances begin to drop off. We start to see a little bit of troughing beginning to occur as we go further along here. So we're going to be kind of back and forth with the moisture here. And hence why I was saying earlier in the video that we're likely to see a little bit of change with that preset map here, but we're kind of just still feeling things out here. Another big factor as to why this could be is because of another oscillation that I'm getting more familiar with, excuse me, by the way. And that is the MJO, the Madden-Julian oscillation. So we're looking at this for two reasons here. Obviously, we're trying to look for any sort of increase in the enhanced rainfall phase. And in particular, the areas that I will be more interested in right now might be over towards the northwestern states and, of course, maybe over towards the monsoon region in the southwest as well. I think in the early phase, we're going to see a good bit of action there, but it's going to slowly begin to taper off. Now, it looks like behind this, we're going to start to see a bit of a dry phase here. The enhanced rainfall phase also is going to need to be paid attention over towards the tropics right now. Looks like we're entering a dry phase, but by the time we get towards the middle part of the month here, watch how quickly things begin to change here. Look at that right here. over towards the main development region, which is going to be a key area for tropical development. We're starting to see that increase in moisture there. And then we're seeing this area between, well, just north of the Panama Canal here, where we're starting to see that increase in moisture. This is going to help increase those storm chances as we go later down the line in the month for the southeast as well. So a lot of moving parts with this right now. Obviously, we don't have the final outlook, so be prepared for a few changes here. But that's all we got for this one. Appreciate y'all tuning in. Let's keep the train rolling here as we go forward, and I will see you in the next one. Till then, everybody, take care.